Hello everyone and welcome to Stronger Minds, the whole body mental health podcast with me, Kimberly Wilson. I'm a chartered practitioner psychologist, speaker and author with a master's degree in nutrition. So I talk about psychology, mental health, food and everything in between. The aim is that you leave this short podcast informed and in possession of some helpful, practical tips to support your brain health, cognitive function and overall well-being. The following is an amended extract from my book, How to Build a Healthy Brain. This week, I'm going to teach you how to tackle those all-important conversations in all our lives that we so often put off. I'm talking about talking to a partner about sex, money worries, or secret debts, admitting that you're unsure about having children when your partner is keen to start a family, telling your friends that you've been hurt by their actions, telling a parent that you felt unloved or judged or rejected by them, or for many people, any conversation that might involve disagreement or conflict. Why do I think it's important to learn these skills? Because so many of life's important problems can only be solved by conjuring the courage to have a difficult conversation. Yet, for something that on the surface appears to be very straightforward, having the conversation is always a frightening prospect. And I'm serious. I've seen corporate CEOs shudder at the idea of, asking their parents to respect their decisions, for example. So it doesn't matter who you are or how successful you are in other parts of your life, there will be at least one big conversation that you're avoiding. And here's why you shouldn't avoid it. 1, the longer you put it off, the harder it will be. You'll build up more tension and anxiety and worry about it. 2, the longer you avoid it, the more days of your life you live compromising your integrity by not being honest about your thoughts, feelings, or who you are. 3, even if the other person can't understand or won't change, there is often tremendous value in demonstrating to yourself that you're worth sticking up for. 4, you are massively underestimating the pressure that avoiding this conversation is putting you under. Every time you think about that person, the relationship, or the event, it chips away at your well-being and your emotional freedom to think about other things. If you can get the conversation out of the way, you free yourself of that burden. 5, it builds emotional competence. Having one big conversation makes it easier to have another one. People who can speak honestly about their feelings benefit from having richer, more fulfilling relationships. And 6, and I say this as someone who has coached and supported hundreds, maybe thousands, many people through what they thought would be the worst event of their lives. All of them survived, and all of them said that they felt much better off for it. Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, there is some preparation and some things to consider. Now, I think the big conversation is important to address, but only if it is safe to do so. So there are some conditions, emotional or situational, in which your well-being might be compromised by having the big conversation. For example, if you rely on this person or these people for emotional or practical support, and the cessation of that care would be deleterious for you. So let's say the issue is that your mother keeps commenting on your body and you really don't like it, but you live at home, you're staying at home, you're living rent-free while you try and save up for your own place. If you have nowhere else to go, you have no other means, and you think that your mother might react angrily, she might throw you out of the house, then we might need to reconsider how we approach this issue. I don't want you to tolerate those conditions forever, but we need to kind of weigh up the pros and cons and the cost-benefit analysis of having the conversation now. Secondly, if there is a genuine risk that you could be harmed by the discussion. So this is situations where the other party, for example, has a history of violence. In this case, it would be best for you to speak to a professional about other ways to manage this relationship, get out of it, get support, rather than trying to address it by yourself head on. And thirdly, the big conversation should probably be avoided by people with a reliance on alcohol. So in my experience, people often turn to drink in order to numb physiological arousal, which is to say, to relax or to shut down their thinking. Now, in this case, attempting an emotionally difficult conversation without having other skills to manage those feelings poses a risk of binge drinking. And in this situation, it is advisable to try to address the drinking or other substance use first and develop healthy emotional coping skills before attempting to have the conversation. And a more general point, in order to have this conversation, which is likely to elicit some arousal, some physical anxiety or some psychological anxiety, you need to be familiar first with tolerating the physiological agitation that comes with that autonomic arousal. So essentially what I mean is the skill of distress tolerance. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go back and listen to episode 123, How to Feel Bad. And bearing in mind that emotions are in large part physical experiences, I do recommend that people develop a range of physical habits and practices to help them process and manage their strong emotions. So things like walking, yoga, dance, a breath practice like the one that I did for you in episode 120. So if that's you, that is where I would start. But when you're ready to approach the conversation, this is how I would suggest you go about it. Step number 1, remind yourself of the costs of the status quo. Because one of the things that we often do when we know we're avoiding something is that we tell ourselves that there is no cost. We think that we're not missing out on anything, it's not causing any harm, so why bother going through all of the upheaval and the difficulty of having the conversation? That's not true. So I want you to make a list of all the ways that avoiding this conversation is diminishing your well-being. You might consider things like the awkward silences, the white lies that you're telling, the anxiety that you're experiencing, that itching gnawing at the back of your mind whenever you're with this person or thinking about this situation, the suppressed anger, the opportunity for a better, more authentic relationship with another person or just yourself. So those things are compromising your physical and psychological health. So I want you to ask yourself seriously, what is this avoidance costing me? Where am I losing out on peace because of this issue? Number 2, list all the ways that you will benefit from having the conversation. Those might be things like greater confidence, more self-respect, improved resilience, because it's not just about having this one conversation. All of these skills that you develop throughout having this conversation generalize so that you will feel more competent in other areas of your life. So you might ask yourself, how will I be better off in the long run if I can find the courage to do this? Number 3, decide whether the benefits outweigh your fear and the risks. And if so, I think you owe it to yourself to give it a try. So the question here is it worth it? Number 4, tell someone you trust that you're going to have the conversation. We're not made to do difficult things by ourselves. Having someone else's support, even they're just moral support, if they're at the end of the phone, they can offer that objectivity and that emotional support. Both of those things are really valuable. And of course, a therapist can help you with these things too. So the question here is, who can help me to handle this? Number 5, here we go. Initiate the conversation. The toughest part, I promise you, is the start. Fortunately, modern technology provides us with several ways of laying the groundwork for a conversation that are a little bit easier than asking that person face to face. So you can send someone a text or a message asking when they would be free to talk. I would suggest against saying something like, we need to talk, because then you just stoke anxiety. But you might say something like, can we make some time in the next week to have a chat? And if they ask you what it's about, then you might say something like, oh, I've been thinking about, whatever this incident is, and I just wanted to clarify a couple of things to make sure that we're okay. So don't keep them in suspense, that's not kind. And you can give them a heads up, that's quite helpful. But you kind of want to have the conversation pretty much as soon as possible so people aren't left hanging. Number 6, prepare. What we know psychologically is that anxiety shuts down our thinking. right? That part of your brain that is thinking about long-term plans and impulse control kind of goes offline when we're very anxious. So it's really wise to prepare for how anxious you will be when it comes to having the conversation. So I don't want you to pretend that you're not going to be anxious, and there's no way that we can take that feeling away. It's a very natural response, an evolved response. So what we need to do is to manage it and mitigate it. That goes back to those physical practices that I mentioned earlier on. It goes back to that distress tolerance, and it includes this preparation piece. So you may want to write down some notes about what you would like to say. I always think this is a really good idea, because what it means is if you lose track, if you become anxious, if you become tearful, you can come back to what you've written down. And it means that you don't leave that conversation thinking, oh, I wish I'd said that and I meant to say that. And, it keeps it kind of much neater and much cleaner, and means you don't have to keep picking up the pieces afterwards. Sometimes people like to write a letter that they then read to the other person, as this gives them a chance to thoroughly think through everything that they want to say in advance. And then the other benefit is that they can then leave that letter with the other person to reread later on. And again, I think this is quite a helpful and kind thing to do, because we can assume that the other person might be anxious too. And so they might be struggling with their own anxieties and finding it difficult to work out what they say or how they feel about what's happening. And so it can be beneficial for them, once their own anxiety has come down and they've recovered their thinking apparatus, to be able to read the letter later on when they're by themselves, when they have a bit more space and time. So the question you're asking here is, what exactly do I want to say? Number 7, have the conversation face to face if you can. This is my preference, because the reason that human faces are so expressive is because the subtleties of emotion expressed in the face are incredibly important in human communication and social life. And if you do this by text message or email, you lose those nuances. Things get misunderstood, they get misconstrued. We often read things as much more hostile when they're in written form than they are in real life. So I would prefer if you could do this face-to-face, especially if that's the modality that you usually communicate with this person through. So the question here is, how can I make sure that I do this properly? Okay, number 8. So you've had the conversation, and now I want you to allow the other person time to think and respond. Right? So creating a little bit of thinking space, because this has been on your mind and you've been preparing for it, but the other person might not have. They may not have known that you felt this way, or they may be overwhelmed by emotions themselves. And as much as you might want answers or explanations, it is fair to accommodate them as well. And so if you can, be curious about their point of view, because presumably you want to have this conversation because you want to continue to have a good relationship with this person. You want to deepen this relationship and make it more real. And if that is the case, then there needs to be a kind of mutual compassion in this situation. As fraught or as anxiety provoking or stressful as it might be, holding some compassion for them, and at least holding some space in mind to understand their perspective, will give you a much firmer foundation to be able to go on to have a positive relationship with them going forwards. Number 9, leave time to recover. Remember that emotions take a physical toll on the body, and this is likely to have been an intensely emotional conversation. So, and it's the same with therapy. I often suggest, if we've had a difficult or heavy session, that people don't plan to do anything afterwards. Clear your diary and just make room for activities that will help you to reduce your levels of physiological arousal. You might go for a walk, you might journal, you might sit on the sofa and watch your favorite soothing TV show. You might just want to go straight to bed. Whatever that is, don't demand much of yourself in the immediacy after the conversation. And so the question here is, how can I reduce my physiological arousal, my physical stress right now? Okay, and number 10, really important step, plan for a follow-up. These conversations can be highly emotionally demanding, and it's not uncommon, even if you write things down, to miss things the first time round, or to have additional thoughts or questions that emerge after you have the conversation. So in that initial planning, or when you start the conversation, try to agree some space to address these additional issues. So you might say, let's meet on Tuesday, and it would be great if we could meet the following Tuesday as well, if in case there's anything else. And what this will also do is give you both some time for those feelings to settle. And as I say, regain your thinking apparatus, let those emotions come down, get your ability to think straight, consolidate the information that you might have learned that might be new to you, make sense of your feelings, all of that. So you need a little bit of time to do that. And that's fair for both of you, and then come back to it. And so the question here is, would it be all right to have another conversation in a week or so in case anything else comes up? So lovelies, we all have an important conversation that we keep putting off, usually because we think it will be awkward or we don't think the other person will change. But as I say, even if they don't, and of course, if it's safe to, I think the conversation is still worth having, because ultimately, it's not about changing the other person. It's about demonstrating to yourself that your opinions and your feelings are valid and that you are worth standing up for. I hope this episode helps you to feel more confident with tackling the big conversations in your life. But that is all that I have for you this week. If you like me in your ears, you might enjoy me in your inbox. You can sign up for my weekly newsletter where I tackle a different brain or mental health theme every month. Things like emotion regulation, self-compassion, and the psychology of defensiveness. You can sign up in the link in the episode description. And if you enjoyed this episode, it would be fantastic if you could share it or consider leaving a positive review. That just leaves me to thank you very much for listening, and until next time, take very good care.